Subscribe to Infidelity Tales Lab for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. Chapter 1. The Observer. Dara Patterson had learned long ago that people rarely look down. In his 15 years as a child psychologist, he discovered that most adults moved through life at eye level, missing the small, silent signals that children sent from below. Now, 3 years into early retirement at 42, that habit of watching remained. It was a Tuesday in late September when Derek first noticed the boy. He'd been carrying his lunch to the small bench outside his home office, a converted garage behind his modest house in suburban Portland, when movement near his trash cans caught his eye. A child, maybe 6 or 7, thin as a wire hanger, was carefully lifting the lid of the recycling bin. Derek froze mid-step, watching his small hands reached inside and retrieved a brown paper bag. His lunch bag from yesterday. The boy opened it with practiced efficiency, examining the half-eaten turkey sandwich Derek had tossed, deemed too dry to finish. Without hesitation, the child took a bite. "Jesus," Derek muttered, instinctively stepping forward. The boy's head snapped up. Dark eyes, too old for his young face, met Derek's. Then he was gone, vanishing between the houses with his stolen meal clutched to his chest. Derek stood there for a full minute, sandwich forgotten in his own hand. His training kicked in automatically. Signs of neglect, malnutrition evident from the brief glimpse, clothes worn and oversized, feral wariness in his movements. That night, Derek couldn't focus on the manuscript he was supposed to be editing, another academic paper on childhood trauma that would gather dust in some journal. His wife, Claire, noticed over dinner. "You're somewhere else," she said, setting down her fork. Her green eyes, the same ones that had first caught his attention 17 years ago at a university mixer, studied him with concern. "What's going on?" Derek told her about the boy. Claire, a special education teacher with her own finely tuned radar for troubled children, immediately understood. "Did you see where he went?" "Not far. He's probably living in the neighborhood. We should call." "And say what?" Derek interrupted gently. "A hungry kid took food from my trash?" "Claire, you know how overloaded CPS is." Without evidence of immediate danger, the truth hung between them, heavy and familiar. They both knew how the system worked, knew its limitations and failures intimately. They'd learned the hard way. 8 years ago, their son Danny had been taken from a grocery store parking lot. 5 years old, there for just seconds while Claire loaded groceries and Derek returned the cart. Security footage showed a white van. No plates visible. No witnesses who could provide details beyond "it happened so fast." The case went cold within months. Derek had thrown himself into work, Claire into her teaching. They'd survived, barely, by focusing outward, helping other children, other families. But the wound never fully healed. "What are you going to do?" Claire asked quietly. Derek looked at his wife, seeing the same pain and determination reflected in her eyes that he felt in his chest. "Watch," he said. "Document. And when we have enough, we act." The next morning, Derek was at his office window before dawn. He'd move his desk to face the small parking area where his trash can stood. At 7:15 a.m., like clockwork, the boy appeared. This time, Derek was ready with his phone, camera zoom activated. The child was more visible in the morning light. White brown hair that needed cutting, wearing jeans that pooled around ankles clad in dirty sneakers. The shirt was a faded superhero design, meant for a kid at least 2 years older. The boy's movements were ritualistic. Check the recycling bin first, then the trash. Extract anything edible. Examine it. Consume it quickly while glancing around every few seconds. The whole process took less than 3 minutes. Derek captured it all, his heart sinking with each frame. Thursday brought rain, but the boy still came. Derek watched him shiver in a thin jacket, water dripping from his hair as he ate soggy crackers from a discarded box. By Friday, Derek had modified his lunch routine. He began carefully wrapping half-eaten sandwiches, sealing bags of chips that were stale, throwing away granola bars in their original packaging. He made it look careless, random. The boy never seemed to notice the setup. Susie Baldwin, Derek's neighbor and a retired nurse, stopped by Saturday morning while Derek was strategically placing his garbage. "Derek Patterson, I've seen you at that window all week, she said, hands on her hips. What are you up to? He told her. Susie's expression shifted from curiosity to concern to anger in rapid succession. There's a boy going hungry in our neighborhood, and nobody knows? I'm trying to figure out where he's from. Have you seen him around? Susie thought for a moment, then shook her head. No, but I'll keep my eyes open. This is wrong, Derek. That child needs help. I know, Derek replied quietly. And he's going to get it. I just need to do this right. What he didn't tell Susie, what he barely admitted to himself, was that every time he saw the boy's face, he saw Danny, saw what could have happened to his son, saw what might still be happening somewhere. And something else gnawed at him, a feeling he couldn't quite name, but recognized from his years in practice. The boy's behavior wasn't just neglected. It was trained. The efficiency, the awareness, the complete lack of any attempt to ask for help. This was a child who'd learned that survival meant staying invisible. That meant something darker than simple poverty or overwhelmed parents. On Sunday, Derek made his decision. Monday morning, he would follow the boy. Chapter 2, The Trail. Monday morning arrived with a cool October chill. Derek had his car keys in hand before sunrise, parked strategically 3 houses down with a clear view of his trash cans. At 7:12 a.m., the boy appeared from the south, emerging from between the Harisa's house and the vacant property next door. Derek's pulse quickened. He hadn't expected the boy to come from that direction. Most of the inhabited homes were north and west. The child went through his usual routine, pocketing items Derek had strategically placed. When he turned to leave, Derek waited until the boy was 30 yards ahead before starting his engine. Following someone on foot while driving required a delicate touch. Too close, and you spooked them. Too far, and you lost them. Derek kept a full block's distance, using parked cars and trees as cover. The boy moved with purpose, cutting through yards and side streets like someone who'd memorized the route. He avoided main roads entirely, sticking to residential backstreets where fewer cars meant fewer eyes. They traveled for nearly 20 minutes, much farther than Derek had anticipated. The neighborhood slowly deteriorated, well-maintained homes giving way to rentals with overgrown lawns, then to a scattered area where the city met the rural outskirts. Chain-link fences replaced white picket ones. Dogs barked from behind weathered siding. The boy finally stopped at a sagging 2-story house at the end of a dead-end street. Peeling gray paint, windows covered with blankets instead of curtains, a yard that was mostly dirt and weeds. A rusted pickup truck sat in the driveway next to a newer black sedan that seemed out of place. Derek parked around the corner and approached on foot, keeping to the tree line. He pulled out his phone, pretending to take a call while his camera recorded. The boy didn't go to the front door. Instead, he circled around back and disappeared. Derek waited, mind racing. The house radiated wrongness. Too quiet. Too closed off. In 15 years of home visits for his practice, he developed an instinct for troubled households. This one screamed it. He was about to risk moving closer when the back door opened. A man emerged, late 40s, thick build, wearing work pants and a stained t-shirt. He lit a cigarette, leaning against the doorframe. Harvey Ortega. Derek didn't know the name yet, but he'd never forget the face. The man's eyes scanned the yard with the casual vigilance of someone used to watching for trouble. After a moment, he called back into the house. Keep them quiet. I don't want another complaint from a neighbor. Them. Plural. Derek's blood went cold. The man finished his cigarette, ground it under his boot, and went back inside. Derek heard the distinctive sound of multiple locks engaging. He waited another 10 minutes, but nothing else happened. Carefully, he made his way back to his car, mind churning. Back home, Claire was in the kitchen making coffee. One look at Derek's face, and she set down the pot. Tell me. Derek laid it out. The location, the house, the locks, the plural pronoun. There are more children, he finished. I don't know how many, but there's more than just the one boy. Claire's face had gone pale. We call the police. Right now. And tell them what? I followed a hungry child and heard a man say them. Claire, you know that's not enough for a warrant, much less action. Then what? Derek pulled out his laptop, already formulating a plan. We document everything. I go back with better equipment. We figure out exactly what's happening in that house. And then we make sure there's enough evidence that they can't ignore it. This isn't your job anymore, Derek. You're not a psychologist. You're not a cop. No, Derek agreed quietly. But I'm someone who can help those kids. Someone who knows how these systems fail. Someone who won't let bureaucracy be the reason another child disappears. The unsaid name hung between them. Danny. Claire closed her eyes, then nodded. Okay, but we do this smart. No risks. No heroics. Just evidence. Over the next 3 days, Derek became intimately familiar with the Gray House. He learned that Harvey Ortega worked at a construction site during the day, returning home around 6 p.m. A woman, his wife Tanya, Derek later confirmed, left each morning at 8 a.m. in the black sedan and returned around 4 p.m. The most disturbing discovery came on Wednesday. Derek had positioned himself in a small park adjacent to the property's back fence, using a telephoto lens disguised as bird-watching equipment. At 3 p.m., the back door opened and children filed out. Not just one, but 6 of them, ranging in age from about 5 to 12. They moved in a silent line, supervised by Tanya Ortega. No playing, no talking, just a mechanical walk around the yard for exactly 15 minutes before filing back inside. Derek's hands shook as he captured the images. The children's faces were blank, emotionless, institutional. He'd seen similar expressions in his career. Kids from the worst group homes, from war zones, from systematic abuse. That night, he printed the photos and spread them across his desk. Claire stood beside him, tears streaming down her face. The boy from the trash can, Derek said, pointing to the smallest child in the line. Corey, that's what I've been calling him in my head. What do we do? Claire whispered. Derek pulled up the Ortega's information on his laptop. Harvey and Tanya Ortega, registered foster parents, licensed for up to 4 children. They have 6, Claire observed. 2 over their limit. That's the least of what they're doing wrong, Derek muttered, scrolling through public records. The couple have been foster parents for 8 years, with 12 different children placed with them during that time. Look at the placement durations. For months average before the kids are moved elsewhere or returned to family. That's unusually fast cycling. Why would they want a revolving door of children? That was the question that kept Derek awake that night. Foster care fraud was usually financial, collecting payments for kids who didn't exist or weren't in their care. But the Ortegas had the children. He'd seen them. So what were they using them for? Friday brought the answer, and it made Derek's blood boil. He'd been watching from his usual spot when a different vehicle pulled up, a white van, unmarked. A man emerged. Norman Simmons, though Derek wouldn't learn the name until later. Thin, nervous energy, carrying a professional camera setup. Derek's stomach dropped. He knew exactly what this was. The man was inside for 90 minutes. When he left, his equipment bags looked heavier. Derek sat frozen in his car, rage and nausea warring inside him. He'd suspected abuse, neglect, maybe child labor. But this was something that required careful, methodical action. One wrong move, and evidence would disappear, children would be moved, and monsters would walk free. He needed more than photos. He needed enough to bury them. Chapter 3. The Connection. Derek didn't go home immediately. Instead, he drove to a quiet coffee shop 3 towns over and opened his laptop, using a VPN he'd installed months ago for research purposes. Norman Simmons. Photography business registered in Salem, specializing in private sessions. No public portfolio. No social media presence beyond a bare-bones Facebook page that hadn't been updated in 2 years. Red flags everywhere. Derek dug deeper, using skills he'd accumulated during the frantic months after Danny's disappearance, when he'd become obsessed with learning investigative techniques. How to search databases. How to find connections. How to trace digital footprints. What he found made his coffee taste like acid. Norman Simmons had been questioned 8 years ago in connection with a series of child abductions in the Pacific Northwest. Questioned but never charged. Insufficient evidence. The case detective's name was in the file. Detective Marcus Chun, Portland PD. Derek's vision blurred. 8 years ago, the same time frame Danny had disappeared. With trembling fingers, he cross-referenced Simmons' known associates from the investigation. 12 names. 3 were in prison. 5 were deceased. 4 showed no current activity. The last name made Derek's heart stop. Harvey Ortega, listed as someone Simmons had been seen with prior to the abductions, but with no proven connection to the crimes. The trail had gone cold before investigators could establish what linked them. "Oh my God," Derek whispered. His son's case file was burned into his memory. He pulled it up on his laptop, digital copies he'd made years ago with Detective Chin's reluctant permission. Scanned through witness statements, timeline reconstruction, persons of interest. There, buried in the supplemental reports. A witness had reported seeing a man matching Simmons' description near the grocery store parking lot the day Danny vanished. They'd never been able to confirm it. The witness had been unsure, the description vague. But now, with this new information, the coincidence was too massive to ignore. Derek's phone buzzed. "Claire, where are you? It's almost midnight. Had that much time passed? I'm coming home. I found something. Claire, I think the Ortegas and this network, I think they might be connected to Danny." The silence on the line lasted several heartbeats. "Come home," Claire finally said. "We'll figure this out together." The drive back felt eternal. Derek's mind raced through scenarios, possibilities, rage threatening to overwhelm calculation. He'd spent 8 years with a hole in his chest, wondering. Now he had names, faces, a house where children were being hurt, and probably, answers about what had happened to his son. Claire was waiting when he arrived, having made coffee despite the late hour. Derek spread out everything. Photos, notes, the connections he'd found. She listened without interrupting, her teacher's mind processing, organizing. "You're sure about this link?" she finally asked. "Sure enough to act on it." "Claire, we can't wait anymore. Those kids need help now." "Agreed. But, Derek," she took his hand, "you need to be honest with yourself about why we're doing this. Is it for them, or is it for Danny?" Derek met his wife's eyes. "Does it matter? Those children are suffering. Whether or not they can tell us anything about our son doesn't change what needs to happen to the Ortegas." "No," Claire agreed, "but it changes how you approach this. If you go in thinking this is revenge, you'll make mistakes. You're angry, rightfully, but angry people miss details." She was right. Derek took a deep breath, forcing himself back into the analytical mindset that had served him throughout his career. "Okay, let's approach this systematically. What do we know for certain?" They spent the next hour creating a timeline, documenting evidence, identifying gaps. By 2 a.m., they had a plan. First, Derek would use his old professional connections to verify the Ortega's foster care status and history. Second, they'd document everything happening at the house for 1 more week, establishing patterns, collecting evidence. Third, they'd approach Detective Chun with what they'd found. But they both knew the real challenge. The system moved slowly, and they'd need overwhelming evidence to overcome the natural skepticism about a cold case connection. "What if Chun doesn't bite?" Claire asked. "What if he says the Danny connection is too thin?" Derek was quiet for a moment. "Then we go over his head. To the FBI, the media, whoever will listen. But those kids don't wait for bureaucracy." Meaning if the official channels don't move fast enough, we make something happen ourselves. Claire studied her husband's face, seeing the determination there. The man she'd married had been passionate but measured, always trusting the system he worked within. That man had started dying the day Danny disappeared. The man sitting across from her now was harder, more pragmatic, willing to cross lines he would have once considered sacred. "I'm with you," she said simply. "Whatever you need." Over the next 5 days, Derek and Claire became a 2-person intelligence operation. Claire used her school connections to pull information on any children who'd been placed with the Ortegas, names, backgrounds, where they'd gone afterward. Derek maintained surveillance, documenting every arrival and departure, every moment the children appeared outside. The pattern became clear. Norman Simmons visited twice a week. A second man, stockier, wearing expensive suits, came every Thursday. Derek managed to get his license plate, registered to a Martin Crosby, CEO of a small import-export company that screamed money laundering. On Saturday, Susie Baldwin stopped by with a casserole and news. I asked around about that house, she said, settling into Derek's office chair. My friend Graciela Wiley, she lives 2 streets over from there, says the Ortegas keep to themselves mostly, but she's heard children crying at odd hours. She almost called the police once, but Harvey Ortega is friendly with some of the local cops. Goes to their barbecues, donates to the police fund. She was afraid nothing would happen. Which cops? Derek asked sharply. Susie pulled out her phone, showing him a photo from a community event. Harvey Ortega, arm around a uniformed officer, both smiling. The officer's name tag was visible. Officer Warren Boyd. Derek photographed the image. Another complication. If the Ortegas had friends in the police department, going through official channels became even more dangerous. Sunday evening, Derek finally called Detective Chun. Derek Patterson, Chun said, surprise evident in his voice. I haven't heard from you in, must be 3 years. I need to meet with you. Tomorrow. It's about Danny's case. A pause. Derek, you know I want to help, but unless you have new, I have names. I have a location. I have an active situation involving multiple children, and I have reason to believe it connects to the network that took my son. Another pause, longer this time. Where and when? They met at a diner in North Portland at 7 a.m. Chun had aged since Derek last saw him. More gray in his hair, deeper lines around his eyes. But his gaze was still sharp. Derek laid out everything methodically. The boy from the trash can. The house. The Ortegas. Norman Simmons. The photographs. The connection to Danny's case. Chun listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each revelation. When Derek finished, the detective sat back and exhaled slowly. This is substantial, he said carefully. But you know, I have to ask, are you certain you're seeing this clearly? The connection to Danny. Derek, I understand why you want to believe there's a link, but I'm not manufacturing a connection. Derek interrupted. Simmons was a person of interest in Danny's case. He's connected to Harvey Ortega. They're actively abusing foster children. That's not my grief talking, Marcus. That's fact. Chun nodded slowly. Okay, I believe you. But here's the problem. Harvey Ortega has friends in the department. Not high-ranking, but enough to cause complications. And what you've described, following a minor, surveilling a private residence without a warrant, defense attorneys would have a field day. So what do you suggest? Give me everything you have. I'll start a formal investigation, get proper surveillance approved, work with Child Protective Services. But Derek, Chun leaned forward. You need to step back. If you're connected to the evidence gathering in any way that defense can exploit, it could sink the entire case. Derek had expected this. Wanted it, even official channels moving, professional investigators taking over. But something in Chun's tone bothered him. How long will that take? To get approvals? Coordinate with CPS? Build a case strong enough to remove the children and arrest the Ortegas? Chun shrugged. 2 weeks minimum. Maybe a month. Those kids don't have a month. I understand, but we have to do this right, or monsters walk free and children stay in hell. Derek finished. I've heard this song before, Marcus. I sang it myself for 15 years, telling parents to trust the system, trust the process. Then Danny was taken and the system ground to a halt because we didn't have enough evidence, enough witnesses, enough time. Chun's jaw tightened. I remember every dead end, Derek. But what's your alternative? Vigilante justice. Derek stood. No, I'm going to give you a gift wrap case. Evidence so clear, so documented, that even with Ortega's cop friends, there's no way to make it disappear. But I'm not waiting a month while this gets lost in bureaucracy. Derek, 2 weeks, Derek said. I'll give you 2 weeks to move officially. But if nothing happens by then, I'm taking this to the media, the FBI, and anyone else who will listen. And Marcus? Those kids are coming out of that house one way or another. He left Chun sitting in the booth, knowing he'd just burned a bridge, but not caring. He'd played by the rules once. It had cost him his son. This time, he'd make his own rules. Chapter 4. The Trap. Derek didn't wait for Chun's 2 weeks. He meant what he said about the detective having time to work officially, but Derek had no intention of sitting idle. Over the next 3 days, he became Norman Simmons' shadow. Simmons kept a predictable schedule. Morning coffee at a local cafe, where he worked on his laptop. Afternoons at his studio, a rented space in an industrial complex. Evenings at various locations, always with his camera equipment. On Wednesday, Derek watched Simmons meet with Martin Crosby, the suit from the Ortega House, an upscale restaurant. Their conversation lasted 90 minutes, papers exchanged, an envelope that bulged suspiciously passing from Crosby to Simmons. Derek photographed everything, adding to the digital file that was growing exponentially. But observation wasn't enough. Derek needed leverage, something that would force the network to expose itself. The answer came Thursday evening when Simmons led Derek to a storage facility on the outskirts of town. Unit 247. Simmons went inside for 15 minutes, emerged empty-handed, and left. Derek waited until midnight, then returned with tools he'd purchased with cash from a hardware store 2 counties over. Lock-picking had been a hobby in college, a party trick that now served a darker purpose. The storage unit's lock yielded after 8 minutes of careful work. Inside, Derek found exactly what he expected and more than he'd feared. Filing cabinets filled with photographs, hard drives, detailed ledgers tracking sessions and payments. And most damning, a map with 12 locations marked throughout Oregon and Washington, including the Ortega House. This wasn't just one operation. It was a network. Derek's hands shook as he photographed everything, uploading files to an encrypted cloud service he'd set up specifically for this. When he finished, the storage unit looked exactly as it had when he arrived. He had what he needed. Now came the dangerous part. Friday morning, Derek created an anonymous email account and sent a carefully crafted message to Norman Simmons. I know what you do at the Ortega House. I have proof. $50,000 by Monday, or everything goes to the FBI, Portland PD, and every major news outlet in the Pacific Northwest. Check your storage unit. I left you a calling card, so you know I'm serious. The calling card was a single photograph, one Derek had taken from the files, placed prominently on top of a filing cabinet. It showed the storage unit itself, proving he'd been inside. Derek sent the email at 9 a.m. By noon, Simmons had checked his storage unit. Derek knew because he had a burner phone with a motion-activated camera hidden across from the unit, sending him real-time alerts. The panicked expression on Simmons' face was deeply satisfying. What happened next would determine everything. Would Simmons pay? Would he run? Or would he do what Derek was counting on? Contact his associates to figure out who was threatening them? The answer came Saturday morning. Derek's surveillance equipment at the Ortega House picked up Norman Simmons arriving at 7 a.m., followed by Martin Crosby 20 minutes later. An emergency meeting. Perfect. Derek had positioned 3 cameras now, covering all angles of the house. Audio was harder, but he'd managed to get a directional microphone close enough to pick up Ray's voices through a partially open window. Said they have proof. Photos from my storage unit. Simmons' voice, high with panic. Calm down. Crosby's voice was smoother, controlled. Could be a bluff. They were in my unit, Martin. They left a photo to prove it. Then we have a leak. Harvey Ortega's deeper voice joined in. Someone we've worked with, maybe? Someone who knows the locations. Or a cop, Crosby suggested. Boyd's been asking questions lately. Maybe he grew a conscience. Boyd's solid, Ortega insisted. I've got too much dirt on him. He's not talking. Derek's recording equipment captured every word. The question is, Crosby continued, do we pay? Or do we clean house? Clean house. Simmons sounded terrified. You mean? We move the merchandise, erase the evidence, and disappear this problem, Crosby said coldly. We've always known this operation had a shelf life. Maybe that time's come. Derek's blood went cold. Merchandise. They were talking about the children like inventory. That's 6 kids to relocate, Ortega said. Not easy to do quickly. I have buyers, Crosby replied. International. They'd take all 6, but the price would be lower than individual sales. Derek's hands clenched into fists. They were talking about trafficking the children out of the country. What about the blackmailer? Simmons asked. We find them, Crosby said flatly, and we make sure they understand the consequences of threatening us. The meeting broke up 20 minutes later, each man leaving separately. Derek had everything on digital recording, backed up in 3 separate locations. But now he faced a timeline crisis. If Crosby moved the children internationally, they might never be recovered. He needed to accelerate his plan. That evening, Derek met with Claire and laid out what he'd learned. Her face went pale as she listened to the recordings. "They're going to sell those babies," she whispered. "Derek, we can't let." "We won't," Derek promised. "But I need your help. Tomorrow, we're going to force their hand." He explained the next phase. Claire listened, then nodded slowly. "It's risky. I know, but we're out of time." Sunday morning, Derek sent a second email to Norman Simmons. "Change your plans. I don't want money. I want a meeting. You, Ortega, and Crosby. Tomorrow, 8 p.m., at the old Morrison paper mill. Come alone, all of you, or the evidence goes public immediately. This is your only chance to negotiate." The Morrison paper mill had been abandoned for 15 years, a shell of rusted metal and crumbling concrete on the edge of town. More importantly, it was isolated, far from help. Exactly the kind of place where desperate men might think they could solve their problem with violence. Derek was counting on it. Chapter 5. The Setup. Monday morning, Derek met with Susie Baldwin and laid out a request that made the older woman's eyes widen. "You want me to watch the Ortega house?" "Not watch. I need you to be there. Tomorrow at 7:30 p.m., I need you to walk up to that front door and tell Harvey Ortega that you're from Child Services doing a random check on his foster children." "Derek, I'm not. I know you're not really from CPS. That's the point." He'll panic, call his partners, and they'll be distracted when they arrive at the meeting. "But more importantly, if something goes wrong with my plan, you'll be a witness that the children were in danger. You'll have seen the conditions yourself." Susie was quiet for a long moment. "You're planning something illegal, aren't you?" "I'm planning something necessary," Derek corrected. "And yes, it crosses legal lines. But Susie, those kids are being hurt every day. Sold like property. I need to make sure that even if I fail, someone knows enough to get them out." She studied his face, then nodded slowly. "Okay, but Derek, don't fail." The rest of Monday was spent preparing. Derek and Claire visited the Morrison paper mill, scouting every entrance, every hiding spot, every structural weakness. Derek planted cameras in 3 locations, set up recording equipment, and established 2 escape routes. "This feels like something out of a movie," Claire said, watching Derek test a portable PA system. "Good movies follow basic psychology," Derek replied. "Create enough pressure, enough fear, and people reveal themselves. Crosby, Ortega, Simmons, they're predators used to being in control. Take that away, make them feel hunted, and they'll make mistakes. And if they just shoot you on sight." Derek showed her the bulletproof vest he'd purchased online. "I'm prepared for that possibility, but I don't think they will. They need to know who I am, what I have, who else knows. They'll want information before they act." That's a lot of assumptions. Based on 15 years of studying criminal psychology. People like this, organized, careful, paranoid, they don't act impulsively. They plan, and when their plans fall apart, they try to regain control through information gathering first. Tuesday arrived with autumn rain, heavy and cold. Derek spent the morning in final preparations, then kissed Claire at noon. "Detective Chun needs to get this," he said, handing her a flash drive. 8 p.m. exactly. Everything's on there. Photos, recordings, locations of evidence. If I don't call you by 8:30, you drive straight to the police station and you don't leave until Chun has seen everything. Claire held the drive like it was precious. "Be careful. Please." "Always am." He wasn't, but saying it made them both feel better. At 7:30 p.m., Susie Baldwin knocked on the Ortega's door. Derek watched remotely through a camera she wore disguised as a brooch. Harvey Ortega answered, instantly suspicious. "Mr. Ortega? I'm with Child Protective Services. We're conducting random checks on foster homes in the area. May I come in?" Ortega's face tightened. "It's after 7 p.m. This isn't appropriate timing." "I apologize, but our schedules have been chaotic. It'll only take a few minutes." "Do you have identification?" Susie showed him a fake ID Derek had created. Not perfect, but good enough to pass a quick glance in poor lighting. Ortega's hand moved to his phone. Let me call my supervisor to confirm this is legitimate. Of course, Susie said cheerfully, while Derek watched Ortega's thumbs fly over his phone screen. Within minutes, the Ortega house was chaos. Derek's other cameras showed Tanya Ortega rushing children into back rooms, Norman Simmons' car pulling up, and Harvey making frantic calls. Perfect. They were distracted, off balance. Derek arrived at the Morrison paper mill at 7:50 p.m. The building loomed against the rainy sky, windows empty black squares. He'd left lights off intentionally. He wanted his opponents disoriented, moving through darkness while he controlled the environment. At 7:58 p.m., headlights appeared. 3 vehicles, Ortega's pickup, Simmons' sedan, and a luxury car Derek recognized as Crosby's. Derek activated the PA system he'd installed, his voice echoing through the empty building. "Gentlemen, leave your phones in your cars. All of them. Then enter through the main entrance. You have 2 minutes." He watched through his camera feed as the 3 men exchanged glances, then reluctantly complied. They moved inside, flashlights cutting through the darkness. "Keep walking," Derek's voice instructed. Straight back to the main production floor. They entered the cavernous space, stopping in the center. Derek activated a ring of battery-powered work lights, illuminating them while leaving the surrounding areas in shadow. "Where are you?" Crosby called out, turning in a circle. "Close enough," Derek replied through the PA. "But let's talk about what I have first." He triggered a projector, displaying images on the concrete wall. Photos from Simmons' storage unit, copies of the ledgers, screenshots of financial transactions. "That's everything you've done," Derek continued. "Every child, every payment, every location in your network. I have the originals in multiple secure locations, set to release automatically if I don't check in every 12 hours. What do you want?" Crosby demanded. "Justice," Derek said simply. "But I'm willing to negotiate. First, tell me about Danny Patterson. 5-year-old boy, taken from a grocery store parking lot 8 years ago. I know you were involved. I want details." The 3 men exchanged glances. Norman Simmons looked ready to vomit. "I don't know what you're talking about," Ortega said. Derek triggered another image, a photo from Danny's case file, side by side with a photo of Simmons from the same time period. "You were seen near the abduction site. All 3 of you were part of the same network back then. I want to know what happened to my son." The last 2 words hung in the air. "Your son," Crosby said slowly, and Derek could hear the calculation in his voice. "So this is personal. That changes things. It doesn't change what you've done. It doesn't change what I have on you." "No," Crosby agreed. "But it changes what you're willing to do. You want information about your boy? We can trade. The evidence for answers. I don't trust you. You don't have to. But Mr. Patterson, it is Patterson, isn't it? We both know you're not a killer. You're not going to shoot us and disappear. You're a former psychologist, a good citizen who wants to save children and find out what happened to his son. So let's talk like rational people." Derek had expected this. Crosby was smart, reading the situation correctly. "Time to shift tactics." "You're right," Derek said, and stepped out from behind a support beam, hands visible and empty. "I'm not a killer, but I'm someone who's very, very tired of monsters hiding behind the law." The 3 men turned to face him. Derek could see their minds working, calculating odds, looking for advantages. "So here's what's going to happen," Derek continued. "You're going to tell me everything about Danny Patterson, and then you're going to—" He didn't get a finish. Harvey Ortega pulled a gun. Chapter 6, The Revelation. The gunshot echoed through the empty mill, but Derek was already moving, diving behind a concrete support pillar. The bulletproof vest would stop center mass shots, but Ortega wasn't aiming carefully. He was firing wildly, panicked. "Harvey, you idiot!" Crosby shouted. "We need to know who else has the evidence." Derek triggered the second phase of his plan. Pre-recorded audio began playing through multiple hidden speakers, recordings of their conversation from Saturday, discussing selling the children, talking about cleaning house. Move the merchandise. International buyers. Too much dirt on Boyd. The effect was immediate. All 3 men froze, recognizing their own voices, understanding that everything had been captured. "It's already over," Derek called out from his cover. "Every word you've spoken, Every document I found, every photo, it's all backed up. Shooting me just adds murder to your charges. Then you're already planning to turn us in, Ortega snarled, guns still raised. Why should we give you anything? Because I'm not the only copy of me, Derek said. Right now, my wife is with Detective Marcus Chun. If I don't call her by 8:30, she hands over everything. But if you answer my questions, I might delay that call. Give you time to run, hide, whatever you think you can do. It's more than you deserve. It was a lie. Claire had instructions to deliver the evidence regardless. But desperate men grasp at any hope. The Patterson boy, Crosby said suddenly, his businessman's mind cutting through panic to find the exit. That's what you really want. Fine, we'll tell you. Then you give us a head start. Derek's heart hammered. Talk. Crosby glanced at Simmons, who looked like he was going to be sick. Norman, I can't. Norman. Crosby's voice cracked like a whip. He already has us. The only question is whether we give him what he wants and buy time, or whether Harvey shoots him and we all go down for murder too. Simmons swallowed hard, then spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. The Patterson boy was an accident. Sort of. We were working a different target that day. Woman with twins in the parking lot. But then we saw the opportunity. Another kid, parents distracted. The boy was so quick to get, and we thought. You thought you'd take him too? Derek finished, his voice hollow. Where is he? What did you do with my son? Simmons couldn't meet his eyes. There was a buyer. Out of state. Big money for young boys. He was gone within 48 hours. I swear, we didn't hurt him. We facilitated the transfer. Who was the buyer? I don't know names. Crosby handles that level. Derek turned to Crosby, who shrugged. Client confidentiality. But I can tell you he's dead now. Car accident, 3 years ago. Took his secrets with him. The words hit Derek like physical blows. Danny was gone. Had been gone for 8 years. Sold to a monster who is now beyond justice. Dead ends everywhere. But at least he finally knew. Was Danny alive when he was taken? Derek asked, his voice breaking slightly. Did he suffer? He was fine, Simmons said quickly. Scared, but physically fine. We sedated him for the transport. I swear, that's all I know. Derek closed his eyes briefly. It wasn't closure. It would never be closure. But it was something. When he opened them, his expression had hardened. Thank you for confirming what you are, he said coldly. Now here's what you don't know. The police are already on their way. Susie Baldwin has been inside your house, Harvey. She's seen the conditions. She's a witness. And in about. He checked his watch. For minutes, Detective Chun is going to receive a complete dossier on everything you've done. You said, Ortega started. I lied, Derek interrupted. Did you really think I'd let child traffickers walk away? I wanted you here away from those kids, giving full confessions on camera. He gestured to the hidden cameras. Every word recorded. Your own voices condemning you. Crosby's face went white. You son of a... The sound of sirens cut through the night. Multiple vehicles, approaching fast. Derek had timed it perfectly. He'd given Chun the evidence and location at 8 p.m. exactly, with a 30-minute buffer for the detective to organize a response. Run if you want, Derek said, or stay and face what you've done. Either way, those kids are safe tonight. And the network you built? I have all 12 locations. Chin's already coordinating raids across Oregon and Washington. Harvey Ortega raised his gun again, but Martin Crosby grabbed his arm. It's over, Crosby said quietly. We run, we look guilty. We stay, maybe we can work deals, flip on buyers, reduce sentences. I'm not going to prison, Ortega said wildly. I'm not. The main entrance exploded inward with a crash. Police, drop your weapons. Tactical teams flooded in, flashlights and laser sights cutting through the darkness. Derek raised his hand slowly, making himself visible. Derek Patterson. I'm unarmed. The suspects are 30 feet ahead of me. Detective Chun appeared, flanked by officers. He took in the scene. The 3 traffickers, the projection equipment, Derek standing calmly in his bulletproof vest. You couldn't wait 2 weeks, Chun said, but there was no anger in his voice. They were going to move the kids internationally. I couldn't risk it. The recording equipment, everything you need is on those cameras. Full confessions, including information about my son's case. Chin's expression softened slightly. Did you get answers? Some. Not the ones I wanted. Officers were cuffing the 3 men now, reading rights, securing the scene. Norman Simmons was crying. Harvey Ortega looked shocked, disbelieving. Martin Crosby stayed silent, already thinking about legal strategies. Chun pulled Derek aside. This is going to be complicated legally. You conducted illegal surveillance, broke into a storage unit, entrapped suspects. I provided evidence of active child abuse and trafficking, Derek corrected. Everything I found would have been discovered eventually with proper warrants. I just expedited the process. A prosecutor might not see it that way. Then we'll find out in court. But Chun, those kids are safe. Tonight. Not in 2 weeks or 2 months. Tonight. That's worth whatever consequences come. The detective studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Yeah, it is. For what it's worth, Derek, you did good work. Messy, legally questionable work, but good. What happens to the children? CPS is taking them into protective custody now. They'll need medical evaluations, psychological assessment, proper placement. It'll take time, but they're safe. Derek felt something loosen in his chest. And the network? We're executing warrants at all 12 locations as we speak. You handed us the entire operation gift-wrapped. This is going to be national news by morning. Good, Derek said. Let it be. Let everyone know what these monsters did. Let there be no place for them to hide. As officers led the 3 men out to squad cars, Norman Simmons called out to Derek. I'm sorry. About your son, I'm sorry. Derek looked at him without expression. No, you're not. You're sorry you got caught. But you'll be sorry. Every single day in prison, you'll remember that you destroyed families for money. And I hope it eats you alive. He turned away before Simmons could respond. Chapter 7. The Aftermath. The Portland television stations led with the story at 6 a.m. Wednesday morning. Massive child trafficking ring broken up scrolled across the bottom of every screen. By noon, it had gone national. Derek watched from his living room, Claire beside him, as reporters detailed the rescue of 18 children from 12 locations across 2 states. The names Harvey Ortega, Norman Simmons, and Martin Crosby were forever linked to one of the largest trafficking operations the Pacific Northwest had ever seen. What the news couldn't report yet, was Derek's role. Chun had managed to keep his name out of initial reports, describing only a confidential informant who provided crucial evidence. How long before that confidentiality breaks down? Claire asked. Days, maybe, Derek admitted. Someone will talk. A defense attorney looking for an angle. A reporter digging deeper. My name will come out. And then we deal with it. Together. The doorbell rang. Derek answered to find Detective Chun on his doorstep, looking exhausted. Can I come in? They sat in Derek's office, surrounded by evidence and research Derek was now carefully documenting for official use. The Ortega children, all 6, are in medical care, Chun began. Physically, they'll recover. Psychologically, that's going to take years. But they're alive, safe, and getting help. Any names? Next of kin. Working on it. 2 were reported missing from other states. 3 were taken from parents who lost custody, legally questionable removals that someone in the system facilitated. The 6th is... Chun paused. He's the one you first noticed. Boy named Corey Wells. He was never formally reported missing because nobody knew he existed. Born at home, no birth certificate, no medical records. His mother died of an overdose 2 years ago, and he ended up with the Ortegas through an illegal private adoption. Derek's chest tightened. So he's been invisible his whole life. Until you saw him eating from your trash can, Chun said quietly. You saved that kid's life, Derek. All of them, but especially him. What happens to Corey now? Foster care, properly done this time. We're working with a specialized agency that handles trauma cases. He'll get therapy, education, a chance at a normal childhood. Derek nodded, but something Chun said earlier nagged at him. You said legally questionable removals. Someone in the system was helping the Ortegas. Chun's expression darkened. Yeah, that's the next phase of this investigation. We found communications between Tanya Ortega and a caseworker in the state foster system. Looks like they were identifying vulnerable children, ones who wouldn't be missed or looked for too closely and steering them toward the Ortegas. Jesus. How many? Over 8 years? We're thinking at least 20 children cycled through that house. Most were moved out of state, or Chen hesitated, or they disappeared into the network. We're trying to trace them all, but Derek, some of these kids we may never find. The weight of that statement settled over the room. The caseworker? Derek asked. Arrested yesterday. She's already talking, trying to cut a deal. Naming names, identifying other people in the network. This thing is bigger than we thought. What about the buyers? The people who actually purchased these children? Harder to crack. Crosby kept meticulous records, but he used code names and offshore accounts. FBI's Financial Crimes Unit is working it, but it'll take months to unravel. Some of these people are wealthy, connected, careful. They've been doing this for years. Derek felt anger rising again. So they might get away with it? Some of them, maybe, Chen admitted. That's the hard truth, Derek. We'll get the ones we can, but in a network this big, this organized, some fish slip through the net. Then we cast a wider net. Chen studied him. What are you thinking? I'm thinking there are 11 other locations with evidence. Financial records, photos, communications. What if someone went through all of it, organized it, made connections the police might miss because they're overworked and underfunded? Someone like an obsessed former psychologist with research skills and motivation? Exactly like that. Chen was quiet for a moment. Officially, I should tell you to stay out of this. Let the professionals handle it. And unofficially? Unofficially, you've already done more for this case than an army of detectives could have. You have a gift for this, Derek. And if you wanted to volunteer your time analyzing evidence as a consultant. He shrugged. I think we could arrange that. Claire, who'd been listening from the doorway, spoke up. What about the legal issues? You said his methods were questionable. They were. But here's the thing. Harvey Ortega confessed on camera. Norman Simmons confessed. We recovered the children based on evidence Derek provided, but the actual arrest came for what the suspect said and did after police arrived. A good prosecutor can work with that. And a bad prosecutor? Derek asked. Would still have 18 rescued kids and 3 traffickers dead to rights, Chen replied. Your methods were unorthodox, Derek, but the outcome is solid. Plus, you're sympathetic, father who lost his own child, driven to save others. Any prosecutor who comes after you faces terrible optics. It wasn't perfect justice. It wasn't even complete justice. But it was something. Over the next 2 weeks, Derek became an unofficial consultant to the task force Chen assembled. He spent 12 hours a day in a basement office at Portland PD headquarters, sifting through digital files, connecting dots, building profiles of victims and traffickers. Claire returned to teaching, but spent evenings helping Derek organize information. Together, they created a database tracking every child who'd been through the Ortega house and the other network locations. Slowly, names became faces became stories. Children were located, returned to families, placed in safe homes. Not all. 8 were still missing, presumed sold overseas. But 12 were recovered. 12 lives saved. The news coverage intensified. Derek's name eventually leaked, as he'd predicted. Reporters camped outside his house. Some called him a hero. Others questioned his vigilante methods. Derek ignored both extremes, focused on the work. One evening, Susie Baldwin visited with news. You remember Graciela Wiley, my friend who lived near the Ortegas? The one who heard children crying. She called me this morning. Said she's talked to 3 other neighbors, people who suspected something was wrong, but didn't know who to tell or thought they wouldn't be believed. They all want to help, Derek. They want to know what they can do to make sure this never happens again. An idea sparked in Derek's mind. Tell them to stay in touch. I think we might need them. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. The trial of Harvey Ortega, Tanya Ortega, Norman Simmons, and Martin Crosby began 4 months later in March. The prosecution had built an overwhelming case. Physical evidence, financial records, victim testimony, and the damning confessions recorded at the Morrison paper mill. Derek attended every day of the trial, sitting in the back row of the courtroom gallery. Claire came when she could, but Derek was there constantly, a silent presence the defendants couldn't ignore. The defense attorneys tried multiple strategies. They challenged the admissibility of evidence Derek had gathered, arguing illegal search and entrapment. The judge ruled that while Derek's methods were problematic, the defendant's own voluntary confessions, made after Miranda warnings were given by police, were valid. They argued Derek had acted as an agent of the police, requiring warrants. The judge disagreed, noting Derek had acted independently until the moment he contacted Detective Chun. They tried to paint Derek as an obsessed vigilante, motivated by revenge rather than justice. The prosecution countered by calling Corey Wells to the stand. The boy was 10 months older now, healthier with a brightness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. His foster mother, a kind woman named Debbie Wilson, sat beside him as he testified in closed session. Derek wasn't present for the testimony. Victim privacy took precedence, but Chin told him afterward what Corey said. He told the court, "You were the first person who ever saw him as a human being," Chin reported. "That you saved his life by noticing he existed." Derek had to step outside the courthouse after hearing that, overcome with emotion he'd been holding back for months. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Derek watched as witness after witness took the stand. Rescued children, now in therapy and safe homes. Forensic accountants detailing the financial trail. FBI agents explaining the scope of the trafficking network. One witness surprised everyone. Officer Warren Boyd, the cop who'd been friends with Harvey Ortega. He took the stand in handcuffs, having been arrested himself for accepting bribes to look the other way. "I knew something was wrong," Boyd testified, his voice hollow. "I knew, and I did nothing. I let Harvey buy me off with cash and gifts and friendship. Those kids were suffering, and I didn't want to see it." His testimony was devastating in its honesty, a stark reminder that evil often succeeds because good people fail to act. The jury deliberated for 11 hours across 2 days. Derek sat in the courthouse cafeteria, unable to eat, unable to think of anything else. When the verdict came, it was unanimous on all counts. Guilty. Harvey Ortega, guilty of child abuse, trafficking, conspiracy, and assault with a deadly weapon for shooting at Derek. Sentenced to 35 years without parole. Tanya Ortega, guilty of child abuse, trafficking, and conspiracy. Sentenced to 30 years. Norman Simmons, guilty of trafficking, production of child sexual abuse material, and conspiracy. Sentenced to 40 years. Martin Crosby, guilty of trafficking, racketeering, and conspiracy. Sentenced to 45 years. The courtroom erupted in applause, quickly silenced by the judge. But the emotion was palpable. Justice, imperfect but real, had been served. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Derek. "Mr. Patterson, do you feel vindicated? Do you have any regrets about your methods? What message does this send to other vigilantes?" Derek raised a hand for silence, then spoke carefully. "I'm not a vigilante. I'm a father who lost his son, and a citizen who saw children suffering and chose to act when the system moved too slowly. I don't regret what I did to save those kids, but I also recognize that I crossed legal and ethical lines. Would you do it again? I hope I never have to. But if I saw another child eating from my trash can, if I discovered another trafficking network, yes, I would do whatever necessary to save those kids, because they can't save themselves, and too often, the people who should protect them fail. What about your son, Danny? Did you get the answers you needed?" Derek's expression tightened. "I learned what happened to him. It doesn't bring him back. It doesn't heal the wound, but it closes a chapter, and it motivated me to prevent other families from experiencing what we went through." "What's next for you?" Derek smiled slightly. "That's the interesting question." Chapter 9, The Foundation. 6 months after the trial, Derek and Claire stood in a small rented office space in downtown Portland. The sign on the door read, "Danny's Light Foundation, Child Advocacy and Protection." The organization had come together organically. Susie Baldwin and Graciela Wiley recruited neighbors and community members. Detective Chun connected them with child welfare experts. A sympathetic lawyer named Christian Briggs offered pro bono legal services. The foundation's mission was simple: identify at-risk children, provide resources to families and foster parents, train community members to recognize signs of abuse, and advocate for system reform. Derek served as executive director, using his psychology background and newfound investigative skills to coordinate efforts. Claire managed the educational programs, developing training materials for teachers and caregivers. "It's a good name," Susie said, examining the sign. "Danny's Light, bringing visibility to invisible children." "That's the idea," Derek agreed. "Every child we help, every situation we prevent, is a light in the darkness. It won't bring Danny back, but it makes his loss mean something." The Foundation's first major project was a community watch program in neighborhoods with high foster care populations. Trained volunteers, vetted carefully, kept eyes open for children who seemed isolated, neglected, or afraid. "We're not encouraging vigilantism," Derek emphasized in training sessions. "We're creating a web of aware, caring adults who know how to properly report concerns. The system works when people actually use it." Corey Wells was at the Foundation's grand opening, now nearly 2 years older and thriving in his placement with Debbie Wilson. He'd gained weight, smiled easily, and was excelling in school. "Thank you," Debbie told Derek quietly, "for seeing him, for caring." "Thank you for giving him the home he deserves," Derek replied. Corey approached Derek shyly, holding something. "I made this for you," he said, holding out a drawing. It showed a stick figure man looking at a trash can, with a small figure visible nearby. Above them, a sun shone with rays labeled Danny's Light. Derek's eyes filled with tears. "It's perfect, Corey. Thank you. You saved me," Corey said simply. "I wanted you to remember." "I'll never forget," Derek promised. The local news covered the Foundation's opening. Reporter Gina Wagner, who'd followed Derek's story from the beginning, did a feature segment. Dara Patterson could have let bitterness over his son's loss consume him, Wagner reported. Instead, he channeled that pain into action, first by exposing a trafficking network, then by building an organization to prevent future abuse. It's a remarkable transformation of tragedy into purpose. Not everyone approved. Online comments and op-eds criticized Derek's methods, questioned his qualifications, warned about civilians playing investigator. Derek read them without anger. "They're not entirely wrong," he told Claire one evening. "What I did was risky and legally questionable. But I'd do it again because the alternative, doing nothing while children suffered, was unacceptable." "You're not planning to break into more storage units, are you?" Claire asked with a slight smile. "No. Now we have legal channels, official partnerships, community support. We can do this the right way. But Claire, if I ever see another child eating from my trash..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. A year after the Foundation's opening, Derek received a letter forwarded through Detective Chun. No return address, but the postmark was for Nevada. Inside was a single page, handwritten. "Mr. Patterson, I was one of the children in the Nevada house, part of the network you exposed. I'm 18 now, aging out of the system, but alive and safe because of what you did. My foster parents told me your story about your son and how you saved us. I wanted you to know that Danny's loss, as terrible as it is, led to life for people like me. I'm going to college in the fall. I'm going to be okay. Thank you for seeing us when we were invisible. A friend." Derek read the letter 3 times, then carefully filed it in a folder labeled, "Why We Do This." The Foundation grew. Within 2 years, they'd expanded to 3 states, with volunteer chapters training community advocates. They successfully lobbied for stronger foster care oversight laws. They provided resources that helped identify and prevent abuse in hundreds of homes. But the most important work happened quietly. The child who was placed in a safe home instead of a dangerous one. The foster parent who got support before reaching a breaking point. The neighbor who reported concerns instead of looking away. Every single child they helped was a victory, a light in the darkness. On what would have been Danny's 14th birthday, Derek and Claire visited his memorial, a small garden they'd created behind their house, with a bench and flowers and a plaque bearing his name. "I think he'd be proud," Claire said softly, holding Derek's hand. "Of what you've built, what we've built." "I hope so," Derek replied. "I hope wherever he is, he knows that his loss wasn't meaningless, that it changed things, saved kids, They sat in silence for a while, remembering their son, honoring his memory. Derek's phone buzzed. A text from Susie Baldwin. New volunteer training next week. 17 people signed up. We're making a difference, Derek. He smiled and replied, Yes, we are. The sun set over Portland, casting long shadows across the garden. But in the growing darkness, Danny's Light Foundation continued its work, identifying invisible children, bringing them into visibility, giving them hope. Derek Patterson hadn't been able to save his own son, but he'd saved dozens of others. And in doing so, he'd transformed his grief into something powerful, a legacy of protection, advocacy, and light. It wasn't the ending he would have chosen. Danny would never come home. The wound would never fully heal. But it was an ending with meaning, with purpose, with victory, not over his loss, but over the darkness that had taken his son and threatened so many others. And sometimes, meaning was enough. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.